seen the images purporting to show Russian helicopters and tanks. We've seen the troops on the ground. What's the latest that you're seeing and that you're hearing there?
Well, it's the troops on the ground that really you feel the most when you're here. You can't tell, I can't tell you for sure, Anderson, that they are Russian. They're not wearing any kind of military insignia. They are wearing military fatigues, but they're going to very great lengths to try and conceal their identities with balaclavas. The vehicles that they have, the number plates are concealed. But they do seem to have taken over the two main airports here in the capital of Crimea and in Sevastopol, the base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. As you said, the state broadcaster here has been surrounded by what they say, what the Director General told us, was 20 Russian Marines who are protecting the station, which is a pro-Russian station. The main telecommunications company here in Crimea says that their networks have been sabotaged, so there now are no landline communications or telecoms between Crimea and the mainland through their networks. So it would appear as though the key infrastructure in this part of Ukraine has effectively been taken over by these forces. We don't know exactly who they are, but their skill, organization would suggest that they did have at least the backing of Russia behind them, Anderson.
Obviously, this is a Russian-speaking area. Are they welcome there? I mean, are the people there you're running into, do they seem happy that the troops are there?
Well, we've been sort of operating in areas where these masked gunmen have been standing alongside pro-Russian local self-defense units who say they're keeping the order. They've said to us, we don't know where these men come from. We're just sort of chatting to them and exchanging cigarettes. Frankly, I don't really believe that. But these are pro-Russian guys in the south of this country. It's very much an ethnic Russian majority here, and they are mostly pro-Russian. That's not the case across the whole of the Crimean Peninsula. You have also Ukrainian, pro-Ukrainian sort of nationalists, 20%, and 10% Muslim ethnic Tatars. So it's really a very inflammatory mix. But certainly there has not been very much resistance to the steps that have been taken over the past few days, taking over the government, taking over the airport facilities. These guys haven't met with any resistance, particularly to manage to do what they've done, which looks a little bit like a sort of mirror image of what went on in Kiev. It's just here you have pro-Russian forces who've been put into place.
Jim, obviously the fact that President Obama himself spoke out about this underscores the concern within the White House right now, and you have Congressman Mike Rogers saying Russian forces control Crimea. What's the latest you're hearing from your sources?
Well, listen, the U.S. believes these are Russian troops, whether they have the markings on their uniforms or not. And I think in light of our intelligence capabilities, you can be pretty confident they know the scale of the number of troops and so on the ground there. I mean, remember, you're looking at those photographs, those videos, in fact, of helicopters coming in. That's a Russian airframe. That's a Russian helicopter that the Russians use coming across into Ukrainian territory. So the question now is, what are Russia's intentions? They've taken over the airports. They've sent more troops to their seaport there. They've had some what appear to be forces around a pro-Russia television station. You know, are there intentions to protect some Russian interests in Crimea, or do they have greater intentions to take control, as Representative Mike Rogers said, of the Crimean Peninsula? What administration officials are saying at this point, they're still assessing what those intentions are. But the fact is, whatever their intentions are beyond what we've seen already, this is already well beyond what U.S. officials wanted, right? They've been, and we've talked about this, over the last 24, 48 hours, they've repeatedly, U.S. officials, been warning Russia not to send troops into the country. So what we've seen to this point, you know, it's already crossed that line as defined by U.S. officials.
And in terms of threats that the U.S. has made, I mean, they say that the U.S. might not attend the G8 summit in Russia in June if Russian troops are in Ukraine. Does that really pull much weight? I mean, obviously Russia wants involvement in the G8. Russia doesn't want to be punished in its membership in the G8, but that's far down the road in terms of a threat.
It is. There's some time between now and then, but I think conceivably, if the G8 becomes the G7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, particularly if you get some U.S. allies in Europe, the UK, Germany, etc., to do the same, this was going to be a marquee event for the Russians in Sochi, the site of the Olympics. To not have the players show up, that would be a blow. And the White House officials also referenced other measures. They said that the Russians have been reaching out for greater economic and trade ties, that's something that the U.S. would not pursue in light of this. But it's interesting. Even John Boehner, when he issued a statement today, a critical statement of the president, saying in effect that the U.S. has been too weak to this point, he talked about maximizing economic and political punishment at this point, right? No, even he was not mentioning military or a more kinetic response in that sense. So really, when you think about it, the practical tools that are available to the U.S. are largely in the economic and diplomatic sphere. There are other steps that you could take. Senator John McCain was on our air earlier talking about revisiting putting U.S. missile defense in the Czech Republic. Remember Russia's response to that when we went through that a couple of years ago. But that, to this point, is something that we have not heard the administration is considering.
And Ian, you're on the ground in Kiev. What's the scene like there? How are people responding to what's going on in Crimea?
Well, the government here is definitely very concerned, Anderson. They see this as an invasion by the Russians of the Crimea that is an attempt to annex the Crimea as part of Russia. Really, though, they're looking at a diplomatic effort now. There's no doubt that the Ukrainians just could not go blow to blow with the Russians. They just don't have the firepower that the Russians do. So they're looking abroad, and that look goes towards the United Nations. They're asking the UN Security Council to get involved. It's unclear what role they would play, as Russia, as you know, has veto power in the Security Council. And Moscow has been concerned over the ethnic Russians in the Crimea. One thing that the Ukrainian government has said they're going to do is ask the EU to send monitors in here to monitor the situation in the Crimea to show that the ethnic Russians aren't being discriminated against, they're not being oppressed. But really, one thing we should bring up is there was a peace treaty, a memorandum, the Budapest memorandum, signed in 1994 by the United States, the UK, as well as Russia and Ukraine, saying that they will respect Ukraine's national integrity if Ukraine gives up their nuclear weapons. So countries are going to have to be held accountable who signed this memorandum, Anderson.
Although certainly Russia is saying that what's happening right now in Crimea does prescribe to binational agreements that currently exist.